In the vastness of space, where the stars seemed like distant whispers of forgotten dreams, the Zarn warship glided silently toward Earth. Its black, imposing structure cut through the cosmos like a shadow, a symbol of unstoppable power. Inside, alien soldiers prepared for what they were about to do: conquer, destroy, and enslave. At the heart of the warship stood Jareth, the alien queen. Her eyes, cold and piercing, held the weight of countless victories. Her species, the Zarn, were known for their strength and their ruthless efficiency. No one had ever been able to resist her, until now. She had come to Earth with a single purpose: to break the humans, to make them bow to her. She had read about them, fragile, weak creatures who had no place in the grand design of the universe. And yet they had fought back, refusing to surrender their home. Jareth was puzzled. How could these small, insignificant beings challenge the might of the Zarn? As her ship hovered above the human city, she looked down with a sense of superiority. This world, with its vast oceans and endless forests, would soon be hers. The humans would kneel. It was only a matter of time. Jareth stepped onto the bridge of her ship, her long, sharp antennae twitching in excitement. Her soldiers stood at attention, their weapons ready. They had brought the humans to a massive facility, a place where they would be made to understand their place in the galaxy. And in the center of the room stood a man, tall, with dark eyes full of defiance. His name was Captain John Mitchell, the leader of the human resistance. Jareth had been told about him. He was different from the others. He didn't cower, didn't plead. His people had tried to resist, but their weapons were no match for the Zarn's advanced technology. Yet, even in the face of certain defeat, John Mitchell stood as a symbol of defiance. The alien queen walked toward him slowly, her steps echoing through the room. The humans around her shivered in fear, but John did not flinch. He stood firm, his gaze locked with hers. He knew what was coming, but he wasn't afraid. Jareth stopped in front of him, her eyes narrowing. "You have no idea who I am, do you, human?" she asked, her voice cold as ice. John's response was calm, almost too calm. "I know exactly who you are, and I know exactly what you want." The queen's lips curled into a smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. "You think you can stand against me? You are nothing but fragile flesh. I am a ruler of worlds, and you are just one insignificant human." John didn't break his gaze. "We may be small, but we're not weak. You'll see." Jareth laughed, a sound that filled the room with cold amusement. "You talk as though you have a chance. Your people have failed, you have failed." John shook his head, his voice still unwavering. "No, we haven't failed, we're still here, and we're still fighting." For a moment Jareth was silent, studying him. There was something in his eyes, something she hadn't expected. It wasn't fear. It wasn't desperation. It was something deeper, something more dangerous. Hope. And that made her pause. She had never encountered anything like this before. The humans, for all their weakness, had something she hadn't seen in any of the countless species she had conquered: a refusal to give up. It wasn't just stubbornness. It was strength. And it was something that made her hesitate just for a moment. But she quickly pushed the thought aside. No, she was the queen, the ruler of worlds. The Zarn were unbeatable. This human would kneel just like the others. "Your defiance is amusing," Jareth said, her tone sharpening once again. "But in the end it will cost you, and your people." John's expression softened just a little. "Maybe, but I don't think you understand. We fight not because we think we'll win. We fight because we have to, and as long as we fight, we haven't lost." Jareth stared at him for a long moment, her mind racing. This human, this one human, had dared to stand before her, unafraid, unbroken, and that was something she had never expected. With a final glance at John, the queen turned away. "You will learn," she said, her voice laced with cold finality, "that resistance is futile." But as she walked away, a small seed of doubt began to take root in her mind. Perhaps, just perhaps, this human was something more than she had ever anticipated. Part 2: The Standoff. The air in the room was thick with tension. Jareth's eyes burned with cold fury as she watched John Mitchell stand before her, unmoving. The other humans around them trembled, their fear almost palpable. Yet John remained calm, like a rock standing firm against the storm. Jareth couldn't understand it. He was just a human, no different from the others she had crushed before. So why was this one different? She crossed her arms, her antennae flicking as she studied him. "You still think you can fight?" she asked, her voice dripping with disbelief. Her words felt like daggers meant to pierce his will. "You are nothing but weak, fragile beings. Your technology can't compare to ours, and your people have already lost. Why do you resist?" John didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. His eyes were steady, determined, locked onto hers with an intensity that Jareth had never seen before. His expression, calm and unshaken, only seemed to make her more furious. "We resist," John said slowly, his voice carrying the weight of every life in this room, "because this is our world, and we won't let anyone take it from us." Jareth felt a sharp, almost unfamiliar feeling in her chest. It wasn't fear, no. But there was something else, something she couldn't quite place. It wasn't in his words, but in the way he said them. His tone, simple but powerful, held a strength that seemed to fill the entire room. "You think your world is worth fighting for?" Jareth asked, her voice rising as if trying to shake him, to break him. "You are outmatched. You are outclassed. Your people can't fight us. You're nothing. And in the end, you will kneel. You will fall in line like the rest." John didn't answer at first. Instead, he took a slow breath and then, with quiet resolve, he stepped forward. He didn't rush, but he closed the distance between them until there was barely a few feet separating him from the Queen. Jareth's soldiers stood at attention, but none of them moved to stop him. They had been trained to follow orders, but this was different. They sensed the weight of the moment. John spoke again, his voice softer this time, but with a strength that pierced the silence. "We fight not because we think we can win, but because we have to. We fight because the alternative is giving up, and we never give up." His words were simple, but they carried a weight that made Jareth pause. She had heard countless speeches from countless leaders, but none had ever affected her like this. The fire in John's eyes was unlike anything she had ever seen. It wasn't desperation. It wasn't even rage. It was something deeper, something that spoke to her on a level she didn't understand. The Queen stepped back, her antennae flicking nervously. This human, this one man, was not afraid. He wasn't pleading for mercy. He wasn't begging for his life. He was simply standing there, unbroken, like a force of nature. She had expected him to crumble under her power, but he hadn't. In fact, he seemed to grow stronger with each passing second. "You're wrong," John continued, his voice unwavering. "We're not weak, and we're not afraid of you. We fight because we believe in something. We believe in freedom. And as long as we have that belief, we'll never lose." Jareth stood there, her mind racing. She was the Queen. She was the one who controlled worlds, who crushed civilizations beneath her boot. She had seen species bow before her, broken by the weight of their own fear. But this human, this one human, was different. He wasn't afraid. And the more she looked at him, the more she began to wonder, why wasn't he afraid? She had come here to conquer, to bend this planet to her will. But now, standing before her was a man who refused to bow, who refused to be broken. And that made Jareth pause. The uncertainty she felt was like a crack in her armor, a weakness she had never known before. Her soldiers were waiting for her orders, their weapons ready. But for the first time, Jareth didn't know what to do. She had come to Earth expecting a quick victory, expecting obedience. But now all she could feel was confusion. She glanced around at her soldiers, then back at John. His eyes were still locked onto hers, steady, unyielding. And Jareth felt something shift within her, something deep and unfamiliar. The humans had something she couldn't quite understand, something she had never experienced herself. A refusal to submit, a strength that came from their spirit, not their weapons. "You think you can win," Jareth said quietly, her voice no longer cold but almost thoughtful. She wasn't mocking him anymore. She wasn't trying to break him, she was just listening. John's response was simple, but it carried a weight that could crush her. "We'll fight even if we lose, but we'll never stop fighting." The queen didn't respond. Instead, she turned and walked away, her mind swirling with thoughts she had never considered. For the first time, she wasn't sure if she had the power to crush this spirit. John stood where he was, watching her go. The room was silent now, but there was a new energy in the air. He had faced the alien queen and had not flinched. He had shown her what humans were capable of. And for the first time, Jareth began to wonder if she had underestimated them. The silence in the room was deafening after Jareth turned away from John Mitchell. She had expected him to break, to beg for mercy, to show fear, but none of that happened. Instead, his calm defiance only deepened the confusion and anger bubbling inside her. She was the queen, the ruler of countless worlds, and no one had ever dared to challenge her with such resolve. Her steps were heavy as she walked away from John. Her soldiers followed her in silence, but Jareth could feel their eyes on her, questioning. For the first time in her life, she wasn't sure about her next move. What had just happened? What was it about this human that made her hesitate? She stopped in front of a large window on her ship, staring out into the blackness of space. The stars seemed so distant, so cold. She had always been certain of her power. Her species had conquered and destroyed without mercy, bending whole civilizations to their will. But now, as she stood here, she found herself shaken by the humanity of one man. Jareth's hands clenched into fists, her anger rising like a storm inside her chest. She was a queen, a conqueror. She was not supposed to feel this way. Weakness was beneath her, and yet John's words lingered in her mind. He had spoken of freedom, of belief, and a strength she had never considered before. She had underestimated humans, and that thought alone made her blood boil. Her officers stood in the background, waiting for her orders, but Jareth didn't speak. She couldn't focus on the task at hand, not with this growing feeling of uncertainty swirling inside her. For the first time, she didn't know what to do. "Your Majesty," one of her generals spoke cautiously, "we could begin the operation. The humans are already broken. They have no chance against us." Jareth turned sharply to face him, her eyes flashing with fury. "Broken?" she spat, her voice low and dangerous. "They are not broken, and they won't be." The general hesitated. He had never seen the queen like this before. She was always calm, always in control, but now there was something different about her. Something was changing. She took a deep breath, her eyes narrowing as she thought back to John's words. "We fight because we have to." Those words had hit her like a punch to the gut. She had expected a world full of cowards, a species that would collapse under her might. But instead, she had found resistance. A resistance that was strong, not because it was built on power, but because it was built on spirit. John Mitchell's unwavering gaze, the fire in his eyes, had shown her something she had never seen before. A strength of will that no weapon, no army could defeat. And that was something Jareth wasn't sure how to handle. The anger inside her twisted into something more. It wasn't fear, it was frustration. She was used to crushing everything in her path. She was the hunter and they were the prey. But this human, this one stubborn man was different. He wasn't going to kneel, wasn't going to beg. He would fight even if it meant losing. Jareth took a deep breath, trying to regain control. She needed to assert her power, to remind herself of who she was. But as she turned back to face her officers, her mind was clouded with thoughts she couldn't push away. She had to break him. She had to make him understand. The humans have no place in this galaxy. They are weak, fragile, and they will bow to me. But somehow, those thoughts felt hollow now. Jareth clenched her fists again. She would not allow this one human to undermine her confidence. She had to show them that their resistance was nothing more than a fleeting moment. She stormed back into the room where John stood. His eyes were still locked onto hers, unwavering. The room was still filled with the same tension, but this time it was heavier. Jareth's heart pounded in her chest, and she could feel the weight of every eye in the room. "Why do you resist?" she asked, her voice shaking with barely contained rage. "Why not just give up and save yourselves the pain?" John's eyes never left hers, and once again he didn't flinch. "Because we believe in something," he said simply, "and we will never stop fighting for it." Jareth's breath caught in her throat. The words were simple, but they echoed like a deep, distant thunder. Believe in something. The words stuck with her, gnawing at her. She stood there, staring at him, her mind a whirlwind of emotion. She had always believed in her superiority, in her ability to crush anything that stood in her way. But John's defiance was something that could not be crushed. It wasn't just about strength. It was about something deeper, something Jareth had never understood before. The Queen's anger was still there, but now it was mixed with confusion. She wanted to break him, to bend him to her will. But in the depths of her being, she knew this was a battle she might not win, not by force alone. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure if she was ready to face that truth. The days that followed were tense. Jareth, the mighty queen of the Zarn, found herself in a place she had never been before, uncertain. Her mind constantly returned to the image of John Mitchell, standing tall before her with defiance in his eyes. He had refused to bow, refused to show fear. And that thought, that memory, gnawed at her like a constant reminder of something she had yet to understand. On the surface, Jareth showed no signs of weakness. She continued to issue orders with the cold efficiency her people had come to expect. The humans were still under her control, but there was something different in the air, a quiet shift that she couldn't ignore. Her soldiers, her officers, looked at her with curiosity. They could sense it too. The Queen, the unshakable ruler, was no longer as certain as she once was. Jareth stood in her chambers, staring out into the vast emptiness of space. The stars, once symbols of power and control, now seemed distant and indifferent. She had come to Earth with one purpose, to crush it. But now she wasn't sure if she was the one in control. It was a feeling she despised. Her thoughts turned to John once more. The calm, steady way he had spoken, the fire in his eyes. It wasn't the typical response of a conquered species. He hadn't begged, hadn't pleaded. No, he had looked at her like she was just another obstacle to overcome. She didn't know why, but that look had shaken her more than she cared to admit. Her fists clenched and Jareth's breath became shallow. "Why am I so affected by this human?" she thought. "Why does he make me question everything I know?" Her mind raced through the possibilities. The humans had no advanced weapons, no superior technology, nothing that should have given them the ability to stand against the might of the Zarn. And yet they were fighting, not out of desperation but out of belief. It was maddening. In the middle of her frustration, she remembered something John had said. "We fight because we have to." Her chest tightened. She had heard countless warriors speak of honor, duty, and strength, but none of them had ever said anything like that. John had spoken as though he understood something deeper than war or survival. He spoke like someone who knew what it meant to live for something greater than himself. The thought stuck with her like a splinter in her mind. What is it that drives them? Jareth knew what it was like to conquer. She had done it countless times. She knew the taste of victory, the power that came with it. But this was something different. The humans weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for something she couldn't quite name, something she hadn't seen in a long time: hope. Not just a hope of winning, but a hope that even in losing, they would not be broken. That was something that could not be easily destroyed. She stood up and paced her room, her mind swirling in confusion. The anger that had once burned so fiercely inside her was now mixed with something she couldn't grasp. She had come here to dominate, to crush these humans into submission, and yet every step she took only seemed to lead her further from that goal. Her soldiers were outside, waiting for her orders, waiting for her to make the next move. But Jareth found herself unable to decide. Part of her still wanted to break them, to remind them who was in charge. But another part of her, one that she didn't want to acknowledge, was beginning to wonder if it was even possible. She thought of John again, standing in the center of that room, unbowed, unbroken. How could one human have that much power? How could his belief in his people, in their future, be stronger than the weapons she wielded? Jareth's mind returned to her people. The Zarn had conquered because they were the strongest. They believed in their power, in their ability to crush all resistance. But now, standing before a race so small and fragile, she began to question everything she had been taught. What if strength wasn't just about power? What if it was about something more? The queen's heart beat faster as she realized the answer she had been avoiding. It's not strength that makes them dangerous. It's their will. Jareth had been blind to it, but now she saw it clearly. The humans had no extraordinary weapons, no fleets of ships or armies of soldiers. What they had was a belief that no matter how many times they were knocked down, they would rise again. They weren't fighting for victory. They were fighting for something more, their freedom, their future, their very spirit. Her chest tightened, the weight of that realization pressing down on her. It was a concept she could not fight, could not conquer. How could she, a ruler who had dominated for centuries, fight against something as intangible as hope? Her breath came out in a shaky exhale. The decision was coming, and Jareth knew it. The question wasn't whether she could destroy the humans. The real question was whether she could destroy what they had that she had never understood until now. As she stood there, staring out into the cold vastness of space, Jareth finally allowed herself to admit something she had never thought she would feel. She respected them, the humans, and that was something she would never have expected. Part 5. The Moment of Change. Jareth stood alone in the dim light of her chamber, staring out at the stars. The vastness of space had always brought her comfort, the cold emptiness reminding her of the power she held. But tonight it felt different. The stars seemed distant, indifferent to her presence. It was as though they too were questioning her purpose, her decisions. And in the stillness, a small, uncomfortable truth began to settle in her heart. She wasn't sure of herself anymore. For days now, Jareth had tried to bury the thoughts that kept creeping back into her mind. The memory of John Mitchell's unwavering gaze, his calm words. "We fight because we have to." He had spoken with such certainty, like it was as natural as breathing. And for the first time in her life, Jareth found herself questioning everything she had ever known. She had conquered countless worlds, destroyed entire civilizations, and bent species to her will without hesitation. The Zarn were powerful, and she was their queen. She had always known that victory was certain. No one could stand against her. Yet here she was, standing before one human who had shown her something she could not comprehend, something stronger than strength, more powerful than weapons. Hope. It was a foreign concept to Jareth. Her people fought because they had to. They fought for survival, for dominance, for the thrill of conquest. But the humans fought for something else, something that had made her pause for the first time in years. The belief that no matter how hard they fell, they would rise again. John's words haunted her. "We will never stop fighting for it." Jareth closed her eyes, trying to shake off the feeling that had taken root in her chest. She was the queen. She was the one who decided who lived and who died. And yet, the more she thought about it, the more she realized that this human was right. The Zarn could destroy them, could wipe them out in a matter of moments, but in the end, it would never be enough. The humans would rebuild. They would fight again. A wave of frustration washed over her. She hated feeling this way. She hated the fact that one human, one defiant soul could shake her belief in her own invincibility. Jareth clenched her fists, her sharp claws digging into her palms. She had always been certain of her power, of the control she held over every life she encountered. And yet now, standing on the edge of this foreign emotion, she wondered if that power was enough. Her officers had gathered outside her chamber, waiting for her decision. The humans had been subdued, their resistance crushed, but Jareth felt no satisfaction in their defeat. She could hear their whispers, their quiet defiance still lingering in the air. They hadn't given up, and that was something she could not ignore. She turned away from the window, her expression hardening. The moment of change had come, and she knew what needed to be done. She could continue with her plan, destroy the humans, break their will completely, and assert her dominance over them. But as she thought about it, something inside her hesitated. The choice felt hollow now. Killing them wouldn't change what she had seen in their eyes. It wouldn't crush what made them strong. It would only feed her own emptiness. Jareth walked out of her chamber, her movements swift and purposeful. Her soldiers stood at attention, ready for her command. But this time, the words she spoke were not the ones they had expected. "Stop," Jareth said, her voice firm but laced with something that surprised even her doubt. "We will not proceed with the attack. The humans will not be destroyed." Her officers exchanged uncertain glances, clearly puzzled by the Queen's sudden change in direction. One of her generals stepped forward hesitantly. "Your Majesty, we've already won. The humans are broken. There is no need to—" "I said stop," Jareth interrupted, her voice cold but with an edge of something else, something softer. "They are not broken." The general bowed his head, but the Queen could see the confusion in his eyes. He, like all her soldiers, had never seen her like this. Never had she shown doubt. Never had she questioned her decisions. Jareth took a deep breath, steadying herself. She had come to Earth to conquer, to rule, to break. But in that moment she realized something else. The humans had something that she and her people lacked. They had the strength of spirit, a force that no weapon could destroy. And though she had never imagined it, Jareth felt a strange respect for them. "I will leave this world," Jareth said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. "This planet is theirs. They will keep it. We will not interfere." Her officers stood in stunned silence. Jareth could see their confusion, their disbelief, but she no longer cared for their opinions. This wasn't about her power. This was about something deeper, something that she had never been able to see in her quest for domination. Turning away from her soldiers, Jareth looked out at the stars once more. The cold emptiness of space no longer seemed like a place of solitude. It now felt like a vast, unexplored frontier. And for the first time in her life, Jareth wasn't sure what lay ahead. But one thing was certain. The humans had shown her a path she had never considered before. A path she would now have to walk, whether she liked it or not. The Queen was no longer certain of her place in the universe, but she had learned something new, and that was a power no one could ever take from her. Jareth stood at the edge of her warship, staring out into the vast, endless expanse of space. The stars glittered far away, cold and indifferent, and yet, for the first time in her life, she felt small. She had never allowed herself to feel anything other than dominance, but today she had learned something she had never anticipated. She had learned that power wasn't always about strength. It wasn't always about domination or fear. Sometimes it was about belief. And the humans had shown her what it meant to believe in something greater than oneself. The decision to leave Earth had been one of the hardest she had ever made. She had come to this world with the firm intention of destroying its people, bending them to her will, and showing them that resistance against the Zarn was futile. But now, she wasn't sure of anything anymore. The humans, despite their weaknesses, had something she couldn't understand at first, a power that no weapon could defeat. They fought not for survival alone, but for their future, for the hope that even in the darkest of times, they would rise again. John Mitchell had been the spark that ignited this shift in her. His calm defiance had unsettled her more than she cared to admit. He had stood before her, a mere human, and refused to bow, refused to beg. His words had struck her deeply. "We fight because we have to." And in those simple words, Jareth had seen something she had never considered: hope. It was a quiet, unspoken power, and it had left her with a choice she had never imagined: to walk away or to continue her path of destruction. Now, as her ship soared through the stars, heading back to the Zarn homeworld, Jareth found herself reflecting on the humans' strength. It wasn't in their bodies, their weapons, or their technology. It was in their hearts. The belief that no matter how many times they were knocked down, they would rise again. They would keep fighting, not for victory, but for their way of life, their freedom. That was something she had never seen before, and it had changed her. She had ordered the fleet to retreat. She had chosen to leave Earth behind, to let the humans keep their world. Her soldiers had been confused. Some had even protested. They had seen this as a victory for the humans, a defeat for the Zarn. But Jareth had known deep down that there was no victory in wiping out a people who refused to give up. There was no honor in destroying a spirit like that. As her ship traveled farther from Earth, Jareth couldn't help but feel a strange sense of loss. She had left behind a world she had intended to conquer, but now she was leaving with more than just an empty victory. She was leaving with the knowledge that something had shifted inside her, and she wasn't sure where it would lead. The human resistance, led by John Mitchell, had shown her that there was more to life than conquest. She had spent so many years thinking that power was the ultimate goal, that the only way to rule was through strength. But the humans had reminded her of something essential, the power of the will to fight for something greater than yourself. As she sat in the quiet of her chamber, Jareth reflected on what she had learned. Her life had been spent conquering, destroying, bending civilizations to her will. But now she wasn't sure if that was the right path anymore. The humans had proven that survival wasn't about strength alone. It was about the spirit, the refusal to back down, even in the face of impossible odds. It was about fighting for your beliefs, even if it meant risking everything. Her mind drifted back to the moment when she had first seen John Mitchell standing before her, unbroken, his eyes filled with something she hadn't known she was missing. She had expected him to crumble. She had expected him to beg for mercy. But instead, he had shown her something far more powerful. He had shown her courage, not because he thought he could win, but because he believed in something worth fighting for. And in that moment, Jareth had felt a shift within herself, a crack in her own certainty, and for the first time, she wasn't sure if she was the one who had the power. But despite the doubts that lingered, Jareth knew she had made the right choice. The humans had taught her something valuable. They had shown her that strength wasn't always about force. It was about the belief in your cause, the will to keep going even when the odds seemed impossible. The queen who had once ruled with fear and power was beginning to see that there was more to life than domination. The days passed as Jareth's ship made its way back to the Zarn homeworld. She spent her time reflecting, trying to understand the changes that had occurred within her. She had left Earth behind, but she had not left its lessons. In her heart, she knew that things could never be the same again. She had learned that true power wasn't about crushing others. It was about respecting the strength of their spirit. When her ship finally arrived back at the Zarn homeworld, Jareth was met with the same cold, unwavering loyalty from her people. They stood at attention, waiting for her to speak, to give them orders. But Jareth was different now. She no longer felt the need to prove her superiority. The humans had shown her a new way, and it was a way she wasn't sure she was ready to share with her people. But it was a path she knew she would have to walk alone. She stepped off the ship, her eyes scanning the familiar sights of her home planet. The Zarn had built an empire based on fear and power, but now Jareth wasn't sure if that was the only way. She had seen the human strength, and it had left her wondering, could the Zarn too change? Could they learn from the very species they had sought to destroy? The answer, Jareth realized, was up to her. The choice was hers to make, and as she walked away from her ship, the weight of the past heavy on her shoulders, she knew that she would never forget the lessons the humans had taught her. The power of belief, the strength of hope, and the unbreakable will to keep fighting for what mattered. Jareth had come to Earth to conquer, but in the end, it was the humans who had shown her the true meaning of strength, and she would carry that lesson with her wherever her path led.